This week on Dig Me Out.
Oh, Elise, it doesn't matter what you say. I just can't stay here every yesterday. Like, keep on acting out the same way we act out. Every way to smile, forget and make believe.
With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Speaking of that union, welcome, Corey Kohler. Welcome to the union.
Hey, Corey.
Newest union member, joined up the past week, and we're happy to have you. Hope you are enjoying going through our backlog of 80s episodes exclusive to Patreon, checking out our Discord community, which I quite frankly cannot keep up with. There's so much conversation happening. Every time I check in, there's like 50 posts in.
It has become my I need to find something new to listen to. It's definitely my go-to.
Oh yeah,
for that.
I have not only stuff, but there's stuff like I'm anticipating, like that instrumental album by the death metal band that everybody's like eagerly awaiting, this obscure instrumental death metal album. Like, ooh, that sounds interesting.
Chip sold us. We're in.
He did. And, enjoy it all there, Corey. And you'll be voting in future polls for albums. And maybe you'll join us for a roundtable like the one that we have tonight. That was from a poll we ran in January for our February roundtable. It's called In the 90s. It's where we look at a band that was successful in the 80s, kind of well known for their 80s output. Previously, we've done Metallica, R.E.M., Van Halen, Tom Petty, Duran Duran, big artists, Aerosmith, And then we look at what they did in the 90s. How did the 90s change them? How did they change the 90s? Lots to talk about. And we always need people that know what they're talking about, because quite often we don't. Joining us, he's under protest. He's joining us. Ian McIver, welcome back.
Hello. I think for this poll, if you had any other band beside the one that I'm protesting about, I would have voted for this roundtable. So, though the third option you had in the poll, I could have come up with a couple of better that would have kept it all within that same theme. So, but I'll let you go through with the poll.
So the poll, which we ran way back a month ago, was 3 artists that were successful or well known in the 90s or in the 80s, but continued on in the 90s. The third place finisher was John Mellencamp. That was the oddball, I think, of this poll. I threw that in there to see what would happen against these other two. I thought those other two might split votes and John Mellencamp might pull ahead, but that was not how it went. Second place was Depeche Mode. That's the one that.
Yeah, there's no way I'm not voting against my favorite band. So.
And the winner of the poll, The Cure. A little band called The Cure. Jay, you've heard of The Cure.
I have.
We've all heard of The Cure. I mean, it's we're not going to do a whole history of the band because that's kind of ridiculous. Everybody kind of knows who Robert Smith is and the hair and all that kind of stuff. The
smeared
memes.
Lipstick.
Yes, exactly. Although when you look at pictures of when he's young, there's not that it's not as out there as it would later happen. Seems like he grew into that.
Yeah. He seems to be one of those people that like invents a character and then just he continues to double down on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nowhere to go but more.
So I know you know who the Cure are, Jay. Have you ever owned any Cure albums or gotten into them?
So they were always in the 80s, they were with Depeche Mode, like the two alternative before alternative was a thing, bands that were most well known, like in junior high and early in high school, like those were the first couple non like mainstream MTV bands that you would just hear about and know about and hear bits and pieces here and there. I also remember them being like popular with girls too, which was a little like unusual, like in terms of you know, a lot of bands would just like girls that would be just into pop music would also like the Cure and Depeche Mode. There was a couple like that in my school, so I just I was very aware of them, and then later like Ministry and Nine Inch Nails and became more aware of them. But they were sort of the like classic in my mind. They sit as like with Depeche Mode as the two like classic 80s alternative bands that sort of, you know, rolled into the 90s into what then became sort of the popular genre of alternative rock.
Ian, when did you first discover the Cure? What do you remember, an album or a song or anything like that?
Well, more the songs, and so for me, I mean, it'd be Just Like Heaven from 1987's "Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me," the music video for that, and then following up obviously with 1989's "Disintegration," and the videos for that. So Lullaby, Love Song, Pictures of You. So, but it wasn't really until the 90s when by that time I was in high school and starting to get into my own musical identity that it's like, okay, I like some similar stuff that I start to get into the Cure. So, I can touch on that as we go through the stuff
Gotcha.
in the 90s.
And I'm like you. I think "Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me" was probably the first time I was like seeing that band on MTV and kind of like, what is this?
Yeah. And those songs were just like in the ether.
Yeah.
So those Just Like Heaven, Pictures of You, Love Song, like they were just, I knew them and I didn't know at the time, probably didn't know at the time they were the Cure. It was later, I sort of, as I became more aware of the band and I heard Wish and started putting together like, oh, that's that band that did this song. Okay, now it's making sense. But yeah, for not having like major radio airplay, at least in Cleveland, it's kind of amazing. Like I knew as much of the catalog as I do.
And I feel like, I don't even know that they were in the movies, but I feel like the whole John Hughes thing, like with the Psychedelic Furs and a lot of those like new wave bands, like they sort of were in that same ballpark where if you saw those movies, then you were sort of aware of like all this alternative music, even if you weren't someone that was going to record stores and going to those shows. You just kind of knew of these bands that were in that universe.
Yes.
But I didn't really get into them in terms of an album. I think Wish was probably the first time I heard an entire album by them, and then I went backwards to Disintegration. That's in terms of sales and in like notoriety in the United States. Disintegration is where they sort of peak. That's where they had, I think that was double platinum in the US, gold in the UK, gold in Germany, gold in Switzerland. Prior to that, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me went platinum in the US and gold in the UK. And then The Head on the Door was the first album to do any sort of success for the Cure in the US. That was a gold album. So you sort of have like this slow climb up to a double platinum with Disintegration. And then Wish is platinum, and Wild Mood Swings is gold in the US. And that's the last time that they registered that achievement with an album release. And then I do remember Wild Mood Swings because that's 96. That's right when I was in the middle of college radio. I remember like Mint Car and those songs getting singles for those, like CD singles prior to the album coming out. And then I remember there was a long build up to the 2000 album Bloodflowers. Like, I want to say that there was stuff like on Napster, like that was floating around, maybe from live shows or what have you. But like there was that was in NME and Q Magazine, like they're working on an album, and it was just like taking forever. I did not realize, and we can get into it with getting into the record, how much turnover there was in terms of people in the band. At one point,
80s is worse.
Yeah, there's a lot of past members. And then famously, I think Lowell Tolhurst, is that how you say it? Tolhurst is probably the most famous member besides Robert Smith, and he was sort of in and out. He got fired right around the time of Disintegration because of alcoholism.
Yeah, so he was one of the original members. He's going back to the Easy Cure days, back in the 70s before they actually transitioned to the Cure. Okay. And this is probably going to lead into the beginning of our 90s discussion, because so Disintegration, he is battling alcoholism. They bring on Roger O'Donnell to fill in with keyboards. Now, Lowell was originally the drummer and then transitioned to keyboards around the Head on the Door. And they brought on Williams to be the drummer. But so during Disintegration, Lowell's doing nothing. Roger's stepping up to bat after helping him out with the previous tour. And then it's like, okay, like the band sent essentially an ultimatum, like you got to get rid of him. And so eventually he did. Now leading into the 90s, the specter of Lowell was still there, because in 91, he then sued Robert Smith and the Cure for ownership and royalties over the name.
Right. So, and I believe during after leaving the band, didn't he go play with Page and Plant?
I think he did, yeah. I'm not as familiar. I'd have to go on Wikipedia and check. So it's my father's the Led Zeppelin fan, not me.
Gotcha. I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure that like that was kind of like a big deal. Yeah, he played with them when they did their Page Plant tour.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh, that's so and so from the Cure playing with them," and I was like, "I don't know what that means. Like, that's fine, but I don't have any like idea like what his role was in the Cure. I didn't know he was a founding member of the Cure and that sort of thing." So, at that point, I was still sort of like listening to just the singles and whatnot in the early to mid 90s, even though I'd heard Wish and gone back, and they actually started the 90s. What's interesting is with the Mixed Up album. Yeah. Which is an album of remixes of previous singles. And there was a single, like they used to do, in the 90s, they'd be pumping out, once you had like 2 albums worth of good material, then there'd be a greatest hits with like a bonus track that would then be the new single. And that's what happened. Never Enough, which is the last track on the Mixed Up record, is actually was a single. So it was their first single of the 90s. And it ended up going to number 1 on the US Alternative Airplay chart, number 6 on the US Dance Club chart, number 25 on the US Hot Dance Single Sales, and number 33 on the US Mainstream chart, also 72 on the Billboard Hot 100. So there's a band that's coming off of like a huge success with Disintegration, a number of big singles from that record, and then put out a remix album and score a big hit single with that. Did either of you check out the Mixed Up album at all?
Oh, I love it. So I obviously have quite a few Cure CDs and
right
and stuff. So so with that album, it collected like a lot of the extended mixes for like Disintegration for those singles and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. But then there was others that were remixed, and some were actually re-recorded vocals. Like they weren't actual remixes in the sense, but and keep in mind in 1990, I mean, throughout the 80s, especially at the start, a lot of remixes were, or 12-inch singles. I'll say, I won't even say remixes, were just extended versions of album tracks, or they might have been just edited down for the album, and the 12-inch was the actual proper version. New Order's Blue Monday would be a prime example of that. And that wasn't really until like the mid 80s where like ZZT did the whole remix single for Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax. And then you start getting the other bands hopping on and doing more remixes with outside people. And so when it came time for Mixed Up, it's like, let's collect this. And Robert Smith wanted to do something a bit fun. I mean, the Disintegration is a very melancholy album,
right?
To put it lightly. So he kind of wanted to somewhat balance it out. Like, let's have a bit of fun. I mean, and The Cure has somewhat been like that. I mean, you go back to 1982 with Pornography. I mean, very definitive gothic rock album, and then you've got The Top afterwards, although it's kind of really Robert Smith's solo album. I mean, but it's more in the psychedelia in terms of music on that album. So, I mean, The Cure has always jumped around with the genre.
Gotcha. I think looking at the transition between, if you look at Disintegration and Wish, having the Mixed Up album in between, even though it's remixes and stuff, it is a little bit like jarring because those aren't dancey records. And then you have this, like you said, like it's mostly 12 inches and remixes and re-recordings, but it's a weird in between period that happens. And this is also,
you're just hanging out the wrong clubs, I think.
I wasn't going to the right clubs when I was 16, 17.
Yeah.
So for Wish, which is the first, album that's not remixes and whatnot, this is the first one. This is where we have what's his name? So
yeah,
the guy who replaced Lowell actually didn't stay with the band.
No. So he left afterwards, and then after the Mixed Up project, Perry Beaumont was brought in, and so he was, I believe, one of the techs beforehand for the previous.
Yeah,
tour.
He was the guitar tech.
Yeah,
and they were like, "Well, let's just have him play."
Yeah, so he came in with keyboards, and then after Pearl Thompson left, switched over to guitars. So he's had a few hats within the band, but yeah, so he came in. So that was a big change, and obviously the big change between the 80s material and the 90s. I mean, excluding Disintegration because it wasn't involved, was the absence of Lull. And you can definitely hear that. I mean, like the Disintegration, that was written by Robert Smith. That was kind of like his, like, okay, I gotta have this masterpiece before I'm 30, and was very depressed about it. And I mean, obviously, it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion, because I don't really care much for anything after Disintegration. So, but then with Wish, now the band is a lot more involved in this creative process.
And what's interesting is they have the same producer for both those records. Dave Allen, who's the producer on Disintegration, is also the producer on Wish. And I mean, he's got the pedigree for this style. I mean, he worked with The Mission and the Chameleons and Wire and Sisters of Mercy, Psychedelic Furs. I mean, he's got a big discography as terms of being a producer.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is? You mentioned about, Disintegration sort of being the ending point for your interest. What's the difference for you between Disintegration and Wish?
Wish, like a lot of the Cure stuff, like let's look at the past 3 albums: Disintegration, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, and The Head on the Door. I mean, there's a fine balance. I mean, Robert Smith has 2 extremes. Like, one is the extreme gothic side, and then the other is a very poppy side. And the 3 albums beforehand had a very delicate balance between those. I mean, like, Just Like Heaven, Lullaby, Pictures of You, Love Song, Close to Me. I mean, those are all songs that you can play on the radio and people aren't going to drive their car off a cliff. But with Wish, it was kind of like, okay, let's get a bit more, and it was a bit more on the poppy side, I found. And it was like, okay, like they I mean, they deserved it. I mean, they had a massive tour in '89. I mean, they can do what they want at this point. And it's just, it was like there's something not there. I mean, there were a couple of songs on Wish that are good. I mean, High, which was the lead single, and then Trust, I think, was the other one, Open, the opening song. So, I mean, it's not to say that this is a bad album, but the other thing as well with this album, I find the other albums are a very cohesive album. This album, you start to get all these different little things, and it's not really cohesive. And that trend would continue with the next album as well.
Gotcha. Jay, did you have thoughts on Wish?
Yeah, so I'm investing most of my time in the 2 90s records. I felt like this didn't feel like so far off from Disintegration. The little bit I listened to it, I definitely hear like more of a band involvement, which I really do like quite a bit. It doesn't probably go as dark and gothy, but instead it gets maybe dreamier when it gets darker. I think it's got. I felt it was pretty consistent. You hear all the different shades of the band, but I think because of that band approach, or you hear the different sides of like Robert Smith's writing, but because of the band approach, it holds together as an album to me pretty well. I was also just impressed by the playing, like the bass lines. I saw on this record they use some 6-string bass. It's very melodic and great tones, really good guitar parts. The drumming is fantastic. Very unique drumming on this record with lots of little accents and just a very unique feel that I can't quite think of another album from a drum standpoint that sounds like this, or another band. So yeah, I think to me it represents what I think of when I think of The Cure. Now I'm coming from a very general perspective on this. I also remember, I don't know, did we cover some of these songs? I remember
we did it. We covered High for a Cure tribute.
I remember a letter to Elise as well too. So I was very familiar with those. That was kind of an easy entry for me back into the record of like, oh yeah, I remember these songs. Okay, this is what this record sounds like. I mean, Friday I'm in Love is a really great pop song. I mean, that is just written like a hit song from the moment it kicks in. Like okay, there's the hook, and that's how like lyrics that are like super radio friendly, and so
I can see Ian grimacing at the mention of Friday I'm in Love.
Yeah. Oh, it just ticks me off that anytime I hear The Cure on satellite radio, it's always Friday I'm in Love, and I'm like, there are so many better songs, and even on this album, like I said, I mean, like High was a great lead single, and it's a good song. Apart was good. Trust is good, and like to me, there's a lot better songs. It's just this one, it's unfortunate. Like it's not. It is a Cure song, but it's not representative of what the Cure is.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's the one that defines them.
I don't care if Monday's blue, Tuesday's grey, and Wednesday too. Thursday, I don't care about you. It's Friday, I'm in love. Monday, you can fall apart. Tuesday, Wednesday, break my heart. Oh, Thursday doesn't even start. It's Friday, I'm in love. Saturday, wait. Sunday always comes too late. Friday never hesitates. I don't care if Monday's black. Tuesday, Wednesday, hard to tell. Thursday, never looking back. It's Friday, I'm in love.
I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap because I feel like if you look at their greatest hits, this slots in with the poppiest of their poppy songs.
Oh yeah.
But it sticks out like a sore thumb on this record because, like you said, Jay, there's definitely more of a dreamy than a gothy aspect to this record. It's also really long. It's like 65 minutes, and there are some overly long tracks on this record that made me zone out for periods of time. I don't feel like this one carries it all the way through the way that like Disintegration does, and Disintegration feels like a real album that's just chock full of really great songs, whereas this feels like there's some really good songs, but it feels like an assemblage of songs as opposed to a song cycle or a concept or some sort of like collection of connected songs.
Like I said, it's not as cohesive as the past 3 albums.
I agree though that song, if you put it with their greatest hits, you're like, oh yeah, this fits right in. And to the point where I had forgotten that it was a 90s song. I thought it was an 80s song. I thought it was released much earlier than it was, and it sort of took me aback. I had to check the record to make sure. I was like, this song's really on this record? It's not mislabeled? Like it even just has a little bit more of an 80s sound to it. Listening to it now.
Like when I think of like their poppy, I mean, like, why can't I be you with those horns? Like that's way poppier and like aggressively poppy than Friday I'm in Love. But I get it because it's such a like it seems like such a simple idea that it's almost annoying.
Yeah. But that's why the Sirius plays the shit out of it.
Right, exactly.
That's what hip hop songs are, you know?
It's the same thing with Radiohead. The only song you hear is Creep on like mainstream radio. They don't play.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll play Fake Plastic Trees, but almost 99% of the time, if you're hearing a Radiohead song on radio, you're hearing Creep.
Creep is a much simpler idea. Like everybody gets it right away.
Right. They're not going to play Paranoid Android.
Like, right. You're like, what are they talking about?
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, this did well. Some of the reviews weren't great. It got
They're also their highest charting album as well. So they went number 1 in UK and other markets as well. Like if you're looking at the album for not in terms of reviews or even sales, because obviously Disintegration was double platinum, but this is their commercial peak.
Yeah, and I think pushed by the success of the single, which when I look back at their, so Friday I'm in Love went to like basically charted in everywhere pretty high. We're talking top 20 basically around the world.
Wow.
Including number 1 as a US alternative hit. So the only country or the only chart on Wikipedia where it's not like top 20 is Australia, made it to 39. And this is coming off of, you got to look at like, this is just a string of Fascination Street, Love Song, Pictures of You, Never Enough. There was also the remix of Close to Me charted from Mixed Up. Before that, you got Hot, 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 Just Like Heaven, and Why Can't I Be You from Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. They all charted well. So, I mean, this is a band that's getting on the radio consistently, not just college radio and not just like underground radio, but they're actually getting into some mainstream radio in the US for a couple of years before this. So it would make sense that then this all peaks with Friday I'm in Love, which is like the penultimate Robert Smith pop song. So after this, well, I got to mention, they put out a bunch of stuff on a bunch of live albums in the 90s.
Yeah, there's 2 live albums. So there was Paris and Show. So, and both covering the tour for Wish. So
also Entreat.
Oh, Entreat was earlier. Sorry. Yeah, Entreat was actually 91. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
But and that was just France only, and then kind of released elsewhere in Europe because it's Europe, and then later re-released fully in 2010 for the Disintegration re-release. And that, so the Entreats one, I mean, obviously I love it. So it's the original version from the 90s was just 8 songs. The re-release has all 12 from Disintegration. So, but then a show in Paris. Trying to recall. So Paris is kind of the has all the hits on.
Gotcha.
And then Show is kind of like the deeper cut for the songs. So actually, I'll just check quickly.
You said you had the CDs. Do you have?
Show is the hit. Paris was the deep cut.
Gotcha. Do you have? So there was a special 1994 cassette only limited edition 4-track instrumental release from the Wish sessions that apparently is very hard to find. I wonder if it's on, if they added it to like extended versions of the album that have been re-released or whatnot. Yeah. I'm just thinking of getting a cassette in the mail in the mid 90s and just being like, now I got to find my Walkman. I switched over to a Discman.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, still, I mean, even the stereo I had in my bedroom in the 90s had cassette and CD. So,
oh yeah, that's how you copied your CDs.
Exactly.
Major mixtapes.
Yeah, and more likely had a car with a cassette player than the CD, and
yeah,
you'd have your Discman with the little cassette thing that you would plug into the headphone.
Plug it in.
Plug it into the car. So
CDs and cars were a disaster for a long time.
Oh yeah,
it took them a long time to work that out.
Yeah, there's a 90s roundtable. Won't cover any albums, but just music technology.
That would be good. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's relive it, all the pain and suffering we had. No wonder the music was depressed in the 90s.
It should be mentioned the live album Show was also accompanied with a VHS.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to slap that in your VHS player, you could watch that show as well as watch those performances of show.
Yeah.
And then, so this follows up. I was going to mention. So the reviews were good, but not like there were some negative reviews of this record, which I was kind of surprised to see. Like Robert Christou was a fan of The Cure, only gave this a C+. It has a 3.5 out of, or 2.5 out of 5 stars on AllMusic, which I was kind of shocked to see.
Huh.
Yeah. Los Angeles Times only gave it 2 out of 4 stars. So there was some dissenting. I mean, some places like NME gave it an 8 out of 10. Rolling Stone gave it a 4 out of 5. So there were some places, but it was more mixed than what I was expecting.
But that's what happened even back then with other bands as well like this. I mean, it's just like, okay, these guys are still outside of the norm. I mean, even though now in '92 alternative has taken off, and I mean, like there's other albums of For the Cure and other peers where it's like, okay, yeah, they've only got 2 out of 5 in Rolling Stone, but then it's like, oh, like 25 years later, we do a retrospective review and 5 stars, man, like can't live without it. So, I mean, like sometimes it's like, yeah, you have to take these things with a grain of salt because they will go back and look at big albums. And it's like, yeah, we trashed it at the time back in '92, but you know what? Now we're like singing its praise. So history's written by the victor, I guess.
Yeah. So after this comes out, they toured a lot. They were a stadium touring band at this point, all around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, they're playing South America. I mean, that's the other thing I don't think that I had a good grasp on was how big this band was. That globally, they were able to play like big festivals and touring and lead tours all around the world. And then so that goes on for a while. They contribute a song to the Crow soundtrack.
Actually, before that, they did the Jimi Hendrix tribute album.
Oh, that's right. The Stone, is it Stone Free?
Yeah, they did Purple Haze. Or I forget what the tribute album is. Right,
Stone Free, a tribute to Jimi Hendrix. That came out in '93, and that featured a very diverse lineup. You have like people like Buddy Guy and Eric Clapton and Pat Metheny, and then also Living Colour and Body Count and the Spin Doctors. This isn't like an alternative Jimi Hendrix tribute album. This is all over the place. You got Slash playing with Paul Rogers and the Band of Gypsies.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. There was I
just remember that being released, and I remember the album cover. That's it. I don't know that I've ever heard any of it.
Yeah. So, I don't remember much. And I mean, at the time, I remember hearing the Cure's cover of Purple Haze because that was a promotional single for this album.
And then following this, then '94 is when the Crow soundtrack comes out, and they contribute the song Burn, which I don't know if that charted or not. I'm going to take a look.
No, it wasn't a single. So
okay.
The only single that they released for the Crow was Stone Temple Pilots' Big Empty, because they were on Atlantic and the soundtrack was put out on Atlantic. So they put one of their own out to promote the album.
Okay.
So even though Burn is definitely by far the best song on that album.
I don't see that was like such a weird cultural thing where the movie did well, but it was really because I feel like more because Brandon Lee died.
Yeah,
and it had
more
all this mythology
famous
around it. Yeah. And then of course they had a lot of big bands that all sort of blew up at the same time. Is that Nine Inch Nails covers Dead Souls on that?
Yeah. So Dead Souls is on there from Nine Inch Nails. So originally for the Crow soundtrack, they approached New Order to do the soundtrack. Joy Division and The Cure were both extensively referenced in the original Crow comic book. And so they approached New Order, who obviously succeeded Joy Division after Ian Curtis's suicide. They were unable to do so because they're busy with their own album and activities in '93 with Regret. So, but then getting both The Cure and Nine Inch Nails to do the Dead Souls, the Joy Division cover was obviously a huge grab, and obviously relates well with the movie and the source material.
So you think that, or would you imagine the Cure contributing a song to the Judge Dredd soundtrack featuring Sylvester Stallone and Rob Schneider?
No.
Yes, they did.
No.
They did that. They did that.
In fact,
Dread
it's called Dread Song.
Yeah, it was over the closing credits.
What?
Yeah.
I don't understand this band.
I know. Yeah. Sometimes there's some weird things.
How does
happening.
that happen?
Yeah. So, So after Wish, I mean, Robert Smith decided, I'm going to do these little stuff. I mean, they didn't do any of this type of stuff throughout the 80s. And I mean, Robert Smith was obviously at first busy with The Cure, and then he was a member of Susie and the Banshees, and then went back and focused on The Cure. So I mean, it was a very busy time, and now it's like, okay, I'm at this level where I can do what I want to do, and so I don't blame him. I mean, results may vary, as we have discussed.
One piece of trivia before we leave the Judge Dredd soundtrack.
Okay.
The Manic Street Preachers' last song that they wrote with Richie Edwards before he disappeared was a song called Judge Yourself. It was supposed to be for the soundtrack. And then he disappeared, and they basically didn't finish the song, and it didn't make the soundtrack. But they ended up releasing it on the Lipstick Traces Secret History of the Manic Street Preachers compilation in 2003. So
it had been recorded at the time. They just
yeah. So that's interesting that was the last song, and it was for the Judge Dredd soundtrack. So weird things all around this Judge Dredd soundtrack. That's all I'm saying.
I remember the movie, but I do not remember there being a soundtrack of note.
Yeah.
Well,
weird.
I feel like every movie in the 90s had to have a bunch of, like, the Cocteau Twins were on it, and
what is this?
It's a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
Very hodgepodge.
And that, but I mean, going back to the Crow soundtrack and Burn, I mean, like this is when I really got into The Cure. So I mean, I got the soundtrack, and it's like, oh my goodness, like Burn was obviously a notable song because, I mean, it was used in the movie. It wasn't just like, oh, here's another song we're going to tack on the soundtrack. I mean, it's prominently used in the movie, so it's like, okay, and it's like, okay, I really like this. I mean, I know on the Discord we had a discussion a few weeks ago, and to me, it's like, to me, this is like the definitive 90s soundtrack. I mean, some people think singles, and they're not wrong, but it's like singles represented a scene where this kind of gave a broad overview of, like, this is what was going on at this point in time in the 90s. And so then it's like, okay, I love this. And so then it's like, okay, go back. Wish, it's okay. Actually, I got Wish and Disintegration at the same time, and I probably listened to the Disintegration first, and I was like, okay, I love this. And Wish was kind of like, that's all right. But But yeah, so I mean, this was the point for me where I kind of latched on. It's like, okay, this is a band. Continue going back into the discography. So,
well, let's take a step forward, because
actually, the only other thing we should say before we move ahead is the other lineup changes that happened at this time as well.
Yeah, lineup changes. Those are important.
Yeah, so because so Paul Thompson left after Wish, and Perry Beaumont, as I said before, would move from from keyboards to guitar. Roger O'Donnell came back, returned to the band for keyboards, and then Boris Wilson, the drummer, since the Head on the Door had left and was replaced by Jason Cooper. Simon Gallup, the bass player, he did leave for a bit because of medical issues. So, I mean, it wasn't like the other times where he was fired from the band or left. So this was more of just a leave, but I mean, he wasn't absent from any of the recordings that I'm aware of.
Now, what's interesting on their 1996 album, Wild Mood Swings, is when you look at their technical credits, it's usually like one or two people. Robert Smith was in control of things. He's working with Dave Allen. They moved to Steve Lyon as the producer on this with Robert Smith. But then you look at like mixing on this record, Alan Moulder, Tim Palmer, Tom Lord Alge, Sean Slade, and Paul Coldery from the Fort Apache studio. I mean, there is like a whole bunch of big name folks involved with making this record happen in terms of the production and engineering end of Wild Mood Swings.
There are 11 people with mixing credits.
That's great. That's like basically a person per song.
I don't think it works as that way.
Yeah, usually you don't do that.
No. No.
Now I remember when I remember spring of 86 or spring of 96. We got the CD single for the 13th. That was the lead single that came out before actually the album.
Everyone feels good in a room. Too cool and a head. A buzzing like them killer bees. Tell me this is not for real. Please tell me this is not for real. Time her eyes get wide. She's always got them stuck on me. I'm surprised at how hot honey colored
and it is a bizarre single to lead this album. It's like a Latin bossa nova with horns and percussion. I mean, I kind of dug it because I wasn't a Cure fan, you know, in terms of like I didn't have any sort of allegiance to Pornography or Head on the Door or any of those albums. So I was just like, oh, this is a weird, interesting, cool song that sounds like the mid 90s where like anything was going. And clearly Robert Smith thought so too, because he decided to like put down the guitar and pick up some castanets. And so is this like, I don't know Cure fans well enough. Do they have a nickname? Are they Curies or Cure heads?
I haven't heard of any nicknames. So.
But I gotta imagine this is a pretty divisive album in the Cure fandom.
Yeah, this is probably up there. I mean, the only album that I could think that would be more divisive would be The Top from 1984. But like I said, that's more of a Robert Smith solo album because he pretty much did everything, and that was also during the time when he was a part of Susie and the Banshee. So yeah, this one's a very divisive one. Although I remember, like, I think it was around 2007, 2008, around time 413 Dream came out, and Robert Smith said, "Oh yeah, this is one of my favorites." So I mean, he's still a fan of it, but but that doesn't mean the fandom has to like it.
And I don't feel like that. Like there are songs on here that sound like The Cure. Like Mint Car sounds in the same vein of like Friday I'm in Love and some of the earlier singles, but there are just some like very weird sounds and choices on this. Jay, what did you think of this record going back to it?
It sounds old, like more dated and older to me than Wish. It was weird that it's actually 2 or 3 years later.
Right.
It doesn't sound like
4 years.
Parts of it sound like very 80s. Parts of it sound almost Disney-like. 13th, I think it's the 13th, could have been on the Lion King, parts of it. Just like, what is going on here? There is Wild Mood Swings is probably the best title for this record. It just feels all over the place. I mean, you've got trumpets and trombone and violin and cello, and like it's just every song is a left turn. Sonically, it sometimes comes back. I think Mint Car is a good example where it kind of comes back to the band format, and feels like a song that could have been from that record, but just sonically it doesn't sound to me as good. It's just a little tinny and kind of I don't know, it lacks that I don't know, that dreary saturated kind of sound that Wish has. This has a much more poppy, punchy sound. And it just sounds thinner overall too.
Yeah, like Club America is an example of where it sounds so thin, and also he's singing in this like faux it sounds like a bad version of The Alarm or something like that. Like I don't know what is going on with him just messing around.
Yeah.
He's like all over the place on this record, and it's really long. And
I think that song has sitar too.
Just
why not? Bust out the sitar. Why not?
Let's just throw things on top of this, and I feel like that. I wonder, like, how much of this was. You mentioned about the band having more influence on the last record. Like, I'd be curious to know, like, how much Robert Smith was like, actually directing these songs, or how much, because it says all songs by the band, like all of them have split 5 ways. So, like, I want to know who was writing what, because there's some weird choices on this record.
Yeah, because I know, like, initially, like I said, Simon Gallup, the bass player, like, he wasn't involved early on because he was on a medical leave from the band. And it was pretty much just Robert Smith and Perry Beaumont who started off, and then they brought back Roger O'Donnell. Then they were able to recruit a drummer. So, I mean, even during, from what I've read, and I don't know how accurate it is, I mean, even within the development of this album, the band went through several iterations in a way. And so, I mean, I don't know if that affected it, because it's like, okay, Robert and Perry start off with a couple of things, and then it's like, okay, and then they pick up Roger, and it's like, okay, now we're going to add on this, and then Simon comes back, and Jason joins the band. So it's like, how much iteration did this stuff go through compared to what was originally proposed? Or did this just all done? It's like, okay, we've got all the players, here's a couple ideas, now let's get some songs going. And it's just like all these just little different ideas that they had. And that might be why it's all over the place. I mean, I know myself, I mean, the only songs I come back to on this album really are Numb and Mint Car, if I feel like it.
It's like they like, it was almost like the directive was write songs and none of them can sound like another one. Like Return sounds like Wings. It sounds like Live or Let Die, as if The Cure wrote Live or Let Die. I mean, it's just like, what is going on? There's no consistency to this record in any way, shape, or form. It's so weird. I just can't wrap my head around and there's there's very little electric guitar, and then when they do, it is so generic sounding. Like, it's a complete opposite of the last record, where you still got really cool guitar lines. You mentioned like the 6-string bass and whatnot, whereas here, like, they bring in some guitar stuff and it's like very bluesy and like, what
Yeah, it sounds like Session Players or something. Like, it doesn't have a cool, like, unique feel. If it does follow, if you're saying Wish, the Wish tour is kind of the culmination of, like, that's the height of their success, right? Like, they're climbing. They get to that. They're playing arenas. They have their biggest hit ever.
Yeah, that's the peak.
This definitely feels like the response to that, to say, like, well, we can do whatever we want. So let's do whatever we want. This sounds very indulgent. And looking at the credits, it reinforces the way it sounds. It just probably cost a ton of money, and they were going to do everything.
And that ties into why I said earlier on about them doing like the cover, the soundtracks, and everything. It's like, we got to a certain point, we can do whatever we want.
Get all the trumpets.
There are a lot of horn players on this record.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trumpet players.
That's too many.
Yeah.
You're not Tower of Power here. You don't need that many trumpet players.
And I'm not even getting into the trombone and saxophone. That's just trumpet.
Right. This album just was so confusing to listen to, and I agree. There's like a couple of really good tracks, and then the rest of it is just like head scratching. Also, because the songs are just like not particularly good. They're just sort of like average songs.
Yeah. They sound like average songs with like a lot of production over top to try to cover that they're average songs, I guess, is a one way to think about it, or say it.
All right, let's move on from that. I do want to get to the For the Masses.
So
we can't forget that. We've covered it on this podcast, for God's sake.
Yeah. So obviously this is straight up my alley. So 1500 Records and God Lives Underwater, they are playing together this Depeche Mode tribute album. And so they were having some difficulty at first. I mean, they secured, obviously, a previously recorded version of Never Let Me Down Again from the Smashing Pumpkins, which was a B-side, I think, in 93 or 94. And so they were having difficulty recruiting people. They approached Robert Smith, and he said, "Sure, I'll do it." Now, of course, soon as they got Robert Smith and The Cure, everyone else jumped on, because I mean, and it's a bit of an oddity. I mean, you look at tribute albums, like all these bands that are influenced. I mean, it's very rare that you have a tribute album with one of your peers on it, because these two bands are know each other and they are friends. So initially they were going to do Walking in My Shoes, but then it wasn't going anywhere. And so then Robert Smith recorded World in My Eyes on his own. So this cover version does not have any other members of the band on it. It was just him in a studio by himself.
Interesting. We've obviously talked about this because we did an episode on this. We like a lot of the songs on here. I was surprised that it didn't get. This was not well received. It got like 4 out of 10 stars in NME when it came out.
Are any of the tribute albums well received?
Very few.
Probably not.
They seem to be, like, from a critical standpoint, a hard sell.
It is there are very hard sells, and I mean, the thing is that most people view tribute albums as kind of controversy-free exposure.
Yeah.
And then this,
like, you've got a well-known band, everyone loves the Beatles or the Stones or Zeppelin, or in this case Depeche Mode. It's like, you know what, no one's going to say anything bad about the songs, but it's like, okay, we can get our name out there, our exposure, but you know what? 2 months later, everyone's going to forget about it. But you know what? Some person listening to this because it's like, oh, I like this band. Oh, this is a good song. I'm going to check out this other song by so and so band. So it's never. I can't think of any that have been received by the press as good.
Yeah.
The same year, the X-Files, the album came out from the movie The X-Files that came out in '98.
Oh, my goodness.
And this has some good stuff on it. The Cure contributed the song More Than This, which is not a cover, I think, of Roxy Music.
No, it's an original composition.
This had some good stuff. Filters doing their cover of One by Three Dog Night. And then the Foo Fighters had Walking After You on there. Bjork had Hunter. The Cardigans had a song on there. Deuce, but I believe not the Kiss song. It also featured Noel Gallagher, Sarah McLachlan, X covering the Doors' Crystal Ship, Soul Coughing. But I don't think I've ever tracked that song down. And I don't have that soundtrack. I had the soundtrack for the show. I had the
Songs in the Key of X.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one. Songs in the Key of X. That was the one that had like Nick Cave and Frank Black and Danzig, and there was a lot of cool stuff on that.
And the Foo Fighters and Filter again.
Yes.
Bit of a trend, I guess.
I just missed all the music that the X-Files had.
X-Files was like its own little like label at that point, putting out so many records.
I see that. Wow.
But mind you, when the movie came out in '98, I mean, that was kind of peak X-Files as well.
Yeah.
So following this, they put out. Well, sorry, actually, it was the year before. Galore, the greatest hits.
Yeah.
And that again featured a new song, which was Wrong Number. Interesting about Wrong Number, it features some famous people. Reeves Gabriel,
yeah,
plays guitar.
David Bowie's guitarist
plays guitar on that song,
and would later join the Cure in 2012.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the photo that you put up for the Patreon advertising this thing, I'm like, you couldn't have chosen one for the 90s. Instead, you got the present day lineup with Reeves Gabriel.
I don't know. Robert Smith looks the same from like 1988 to now. I can't tell. I can't tell what that's all from. But
yeah.
Wrong Number again was another good single for the band. It made its number 8 on the U.S. Hot Modern Tracks chart. And it charted in Australia, Netherlands, New Zealand, and UK in the top 100 in all those places. So, and this was getting close to the end of their record contract.
Yeah.
So the next album, Bloodflowers, that comes out in 2000, is basically the end of their deal with
Fiction and Elektra.
Yeah. And Elektra was starting to go downhill, I think, a little bit at this point as well.
So this album, and as I've said, I'm calling the 1990s 2000 rule. So this album was originally supposed to come out in 1999 and was delayed. I've heard 1998, but I've never seen anything concrete. All I knew is that they were recording the album in 1998 and that. So this album came out in February 15th. So, and if this podcast is coming out on next Tuesday, it'll be coming out on the anniversary of the album. So this was supposed to come out in 1999. and was stated to be the third part of the trilogy with pornography and disintegration, and it kind of fits in. I mean, they're all loosely connected, but I mean, sonically, I mean, like it's very, very dark, very introspective. The only unfortunate part about this album is that there's a lot of guitar droning on this album.
This album was trashed when it came out. Melody Maker titled their review "Goth Awful" and gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. Rolling Stone said Smith can write 4 bad songs in a row, and Cure albums tend to leak filler like an attic spilling insulation.
Yeesh.
Droning and unforgivable. Trouser Press said the album sounds completely uninspired. Smith and company go through the motions of Cure-ness. Now, I remember when Maybe Someday came out, you were like, yeah, this sounds like The Cure. Like, that was the lead single. It was probably on the internet. And
I remember them performing it live on nighttime TV. I forget which one, but like at the time I was in my final year of university, and my sister had just started university. We're both out of town and living together again, and it was just like living at home, except mommy and daddy aren't there to mediate the fights. But yeah, and we both are like, oh, we're staying up because he's on Cure's on Letterman or Jay Leno. I can't remember. It was one of those nighttime ones. Yeah, Mom, they performed Maybe Sunday, or sorry, Maybe Someday. Yeah, there we
go. I didn't spend a ton of time with this, but my impression is aligned with those reviews. The thing that really stood out specifically, though, is it just doesn't have those super catchy melodic lines that all of the other material tends to have. Even while Mood Swings, while it's overproduced, like they at least come in with like some melodic line using, guitar or horns or something that grabs you right away. And this is just like muddy and meandering. Like it just never gets to the point of like, okay, what is the melodic hook here?
Yeah. I mean, myself, I love this album. I mean, of the 3 albums, Wish, Wild Moon Swings, and Blood Flowers, I mean, this is my favorite one of the 3. But yeah, I mean, it could use some editing. I mean, there's no obvious single in that. Like you go back to Pornography from 1982. I mean, yeah, there's The Hanging Garden, but I mean, though that album isn't full of those obvious pop songs, and this is somewhat of the same. I mean, this is an album, not like a collection of songs, which is unfortunate, and it's far more cohesive compared to the previous 2, but at the same time, I mean, it just doesn't reach the height of any of the stuff in the 80s.
Yeah, it felt really muddy and just...
Yeah, like I said, it's a lot of droning.
It was like a blob of... It was like there was like no form to it.
You kept trying to pick it up and it would just fall through your fingers.
Yeah, it was like slime. It was like I couldn't grasp like chord progressions, and it was just like a lot of like it was so difficult to listen to. And I've never listened to the stuff after either the self-titled album in 2004 or 413 Dream in 2008. I just like this record just so turned me on. I remember at the time, because I don't know if you remember this, Jay, but our drummer Mark was a big Cure fan, and he was very excited for this record to come out, and then was like not happy, and I just didn't care after this. Like this was such a boring record. It sounded like someone making a Cure album that didn't know what the Cure did well.
Yeah.
It's like they listened to one song in Disintegration and went, well, this is what they sound like.
Do something gothy.
Like,
okay.
Yeah. So this is where we usually talk about in our, in the 90s episodes, whether a band survived the 90s or whether the 90s did them in. What do you think, Ian? Did The Cure successfully navigate the 90s, or was this the beginning of the end for them?
Their legacy survived the 90s, and there's no question about that. Obviously, they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2019. But the band, it was kind of almost going through the motions compared to what was going on in the 80s. And even if you want a bit more exact answer of if they survived the 90s, well, in 2005, Robert Smith let go of Perry Beaumont and Roger O'Donnell, effectively killing the 90s lineup. And so, I mean, from that perspective, it's like, okay, well, the 90s Cure did not survive.
Yeah.
But like I said, their legacy survived, but I think they fell to their own hubris.
Jay, what about you?
I think Ian nailed it. I mean, this is a band that the catalog will endure. If the output goes down, I'm sure they're still touring and doing well, but like creatively, we've seen this pattern before in these roundtables we've done. Is for a lot of bands that we've talked about, there's something about the 90s ends up being like the last creative peak, and then after that it becomes some floundering, like figuring out what to do, and then reverting back to like, well, we kind of don't have to make new music. We have this huge catalog and we can just continue to go out and tour that and be fine doing that, which is fine. But I think their creativity, potentially went somewhere in the mid 90s.
Yeah, they reached post Some Girls territory.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of true. I mean, just looking at the way that the 90s went, both in terms of their album sales and the quality and the reviews of the records. There's only two, but it's like a big dip from Wish to Wild Mood Swings, and the attempt to recapture that with Bloodflowers is just a big miss. Just so everybody's clear, Robert Smith is teasing a new record. He's teasing a new tour. If that happens, the current lineup is, of course, Robert Smith, Simon Gallup on bass and keyboards, Roger O'Donnell on keyboards and percussion, Jason Cooper on drums and percussion, and Reeves Gabriels on guitar and 6-string bass. That's the current lineup according to Wikipedia. So we'll see what happens. It's like My Bloody Valentine. There's been a lot of teasing going on the last couple of years about, there's new material, new record, and then it hasn't been happening. So I think a lot of these people are waiting for all the COVID restrictions to get lifted so they can plan a big tour and not have it interrupted.
Well, they did the 40th anniversary live shows a few years ago. And so, I mean, they've been discussing about new material since then, but I mean, nothing other than saying, oh yeah, we're thinking of going back to the studio and writing some new stuff. I mean, nothing concrete has been said or established.
Well, Ian, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us, because Jay and I this would have been over a long time ago. Let's put it that way. If it had just been me and Jay, we'd have done a thorough review of Wish. Right. Exactly. So thank you for forming this triangular table with us on this episode. And maybe next year we'll put Depeche Mode up again, and we'll do it up against John Mellencamp, and we'll see what happens with those two.
Well, I've got some payola for you for that.
Well, I'll be curious to see if there's enough melon heads. Is that what Mellencamp fans are called, melon heads?
I don't know. I think now they're just called cougars.
Cougars. There you go.
Wow.
Damn.
Set up
Nailing
Spike.
There we go. Mic drop.
Mic drop. We got to end it on that. That's perfect. Thank you for coming back, Ian. Always love having you. Do you want to plug anything besides your amazing record collection that's behind you? Do you want to design anything?
No, I don't have anything to plug. So.
Okay. Well, we do. Typically at the end of the show, that's what we do, and I'm going to do it right now. So if you would like to join us at Patreon, join the Dig Me Out Union. You can go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. You can vote in the polls for our albums. If depending on what level you're at, you can even vote on the polls to pick these roundtables and pick our 80s episodes. Just head on over to the Union at dmounion.com. And if you want to suggest an album, you go to digmeoutpodcast.com. That's where you go. Drop a album title, artist, a little description. Tell us why you want us to review it, and it'll go in the hopper. And maybe it'll get picked for a future review. It's also where you go to sign up for the Box newsletter. It goes out every week with a couple of new reviews of new 80s and 90s relevant music, TV shows, movies, documentaries, books, anything that's relevant to our mission here at Dig Me Out. And then lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave a positive review for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Dig Me Out.